Hi there and welcome to another video from Hegarty Maths. It's Mr. Hegarty here, and this is our first video on solving quadratic equations by factorising. This is a good video as we've been doing a lot of factorising and a lot of manipulation with quadratics. Now it's time we're actually going to solve some of these quadratic equations. Now to start with, let's link to things we already know. I'm going to need you good at solving one-step equations for this video. Pause the video and double check you can find x in both these cases. Well, in this case, I would hope you subtract 7 off both sides and you would get x is therefore negative 7. In this case, you can add 7 to both sides and you can see that x is going to equal 7. You can just spot as well that negative 7 add 7 must be 0, so that has to be negative 7. And similarly, that has to be positive 7 because positive 7 subtract 7 0. So you can do those, they're so simple you can just spot the answer in those cases. I need you good at that for this video. Also, I need you amazing at your factorising, all different cases. Pause the video and double check you can factorise each of these. Right, this case here where you don't have a number, you can just factorise the x out of both expressions and you would get that. I'd expect you to know that. This one here, you've got 3 terms, so I want you to look for 2 numbers that multiply to negative 27 and they add up to positive 6. Can you think of those numbers? Well, hopefully you can. It's going to be 9 and negative 3. So this will factorise to x add 9, x subtract 3. And this last one you should spot. It's a difference of 2 squares. It's in fact x squared subtract 7 squared. So that factorises by difference of 2 squares as x subtract 7, x add 7. So I need you to be able to spot these and as quick as a flash factorise them for this particular video. Now there's one last idea I need you to think about before we start doing these questions. Pause the video and try and answer this puzzle. Find 2 numbers x and y such that x times y is 10. Well, you might have thought to yourself, well, x could be 10 and y could be 1 because 10 multiplied by 1 is 10. You might have thought, well, 5 and 2. Maybe you even thought, well, negative 10 and negative 1 would multiply to 10. I didn't say x and y had to be whole numbers, so maybe you said, well, I don't know, 20 times a half, or maybe you said 100 times a tenth. And in fact, there are infinitely many numbers, x and y, pairs of numbers x and y, that would satisfy this. There are infinitely many. So that puzzle, you can't solve it. You can't find the x and y I was thinking of. But what about this puzzle? Pause and see if you can think of the answer to this, and is it in any way different? Well, if I asked you to find 2 numbers that multiply to 0, there are infinitely many combinations, to be fair, but for sure one of those numbers has to be 0. So either x is 0 or y is 0. That must be true because 0 times something is 0. One of these numbers must be 0. And that is a better position than here where both numbers could be basically anything. Here, one of the numbers has got to be 0, and that idea is going to be crucial to solving quadratics. Let's start by doing an example straight away. Someone's asked you to solve x squared add 5x add 6 is 0. Now, if there was a way of writing this as 2 expressions multiplied together to equal 0, that would help us, because one of the expressions must be 0 then. One or both of them must be 0. What is the method where we write this as 2 factors or 2 brackets multiplied together? It's called factorising. So if someone gives us a quadratic equation equal to 0, we should always try and factorise it step 1. So step 1, we will factorise it. And this factorises here, you should be super good at this, as x add 2, x add 3 is equal to 0. Now you can think of this as a number. That there is some number, just because it's got x in it, I don't know exactly what the number is. And that is another number. Now we've got 2 things multiplying to 0. So the one thing we know for absolutely sure is either this thing is 0 or this thing is 0. Or they might, they could both be 0. And this will help us solve, therefore, because we know that either x plus 2, this expression must be 0, or x add 3 must be 0. And this one gives us a solution for x. If we take away 2 from both sides, we know that in this case x would be negative 2, and in this case here x would be negative 3. And with the quadratic, you a lot of the time get two answers there. So the answers for this are x is -2 and x is -3. And if you substituted that back in there, you would indeed get 0. Let's try the next one. Solve this quadratic equals 0. Remember step 1, attempt to factorize if you can, if it's easy. So I would write this, I would think two numbers that multiply to 30 and add to 11, I would say that's x add 5, x add 6. So this expression here, all I've done is factorized it, it's equal to 0. Two things multiplying to give you 0, either the first one is 0, x add 5 is 0, or the other possible solution is x add 6 is 0. In this case, x must be -5, and in this case, x must be -6. We've got ourselves two answers there, and there are two answers which we state and underline for the examiner, and we're done. Next ones, pause and have a go. Remember step 1 to factorize. Two numbers that multiply to -10 and add up to +3. This is going to be x add 5, x subtract 2 is equal to 0. Step 1, factorize. Then you make each expression equal to 0. Either x add 5 is equal to 0 or x subtract 2 is equal to 0. In this case, taking away 5 from both sides, x is going to be -5. Or in this case, adding 2 to both sides, x would be equal to 2. There are your two answers. Next one's exactly the same. Just think of that as +1x. Think of two numbers that multiply to -12, add to +1. I know that's going to be x add 4, x subtract 3. Don't forget to make it equal to 0. Two things multiplying to 0. Therefore either the first thing is 0, x add 4 is 0, or the second thing, x subtract 3 is 0. In this case here, taking away 4 from both sides, x would be -4, one solution, or adding 3 to both sides, x would be 3. Both of them are our two answers. Next one's pause, have a go. Step 1, factorize. This factorizes as x subtract 3, x subtract 4 is equal to 0. Two things multiplying to 0, either x subtract 3 is 0, or the other case, x subtract 4 must be 0. Adding 3 to both sides, x is therefore 3. Or in this case, adding 4 to both sides, x is going to be equal to 4. This one here, factorize. I'm going to get x subtract 1, x subtract 6 is equal to 0. Therefore, x subtract 1 is 0, or x subtract 6 is 0. Adding 1 to both sides here, x is 1. Or adding 6 here to both sides, x is equal to 6. And there are your two answers for that one. Next one's pause, have a go. You should realize this is the difference of two squares, so this is x squared subtract 7 squared is 0. We know how difference of two squares factorize. X add 7, x subtract 7 will therefore be 0. Two things multiplying to give you 0, so either the first thing, x add 7 is 0, or the second expression, x subtract 7 is 0. In which case, add 7 to, subtract 7 from both sides. In this case, x is -7, and in this case, x is going to be equal to +7, adding 7 to both sides. Same thing here. This is x squared subtract 8 squared is 0. We know how difference of two squares factorize. X subtract 8, x plus 8 is 0. So therefore either the first expression is 0 or the second expression is 0. In this case, I get x is 8 as an answer, or in this case, I get x is -8 as an answer. So underline those, and there your answer's done. Next scenarios. Now these factorizing is super easy. We don't have a number term, but we've got a common factor of x here and here. So all we've got to do is factorize out that x, and we get x add 8 is equal to 0. Now that's an expression times another expression is 0. Either the first expression is 0, x is 0, or x add 8 is 0. Now we already have the answer here, x is 0 for that. There's nothing else to do, but here we need to take off 8 of both sides. X is -8 is the other answer. So the two answers are there. Same old thing here, factorize out an x, we get x subtract 7 is 0. Two things multiplying to 0, either x is equal to 0, this expression is 0, or x subtract 7 is equal to 0, which adding 7 to both sides gives us x is equal to 7. So our two answers in that case. And that's it for this video. Thanks very much for watching.